Let's start this over. All right, guys, I'm Will Alexander. Welcome to the channel, and this is my review of the Weston Range. The Weston Range is a all-mountain directional twin snowboard. There's a lot of things to unpack with that, with the way that they designed this board and the way that they set things up. For reference, I'm 6'6". The time that I was riding this board, I was about 215 pounds, and I was riding it with my Lobster Haldor Pro bindings and my 32 lashed boots. So I got a size 14 boot. I would have loved to get on, I think it's the 163 version of this, which is a little bit wider than this one, but they have this at a ski swap. I picked it up because I've been itching to ride one of these boards. Weston, being made in the US, doesn't have retailers that they usually go to, so being able to find one of these boards here in Nevada is kind of a rarity, so I was pumped to get it. I picked it up and rode it myself. So this is a completely unbiased, bought the board myself review. So Weston has this set up as a directional all-mountain board and then also a twin board. You can kind of play with it depending on how much of either one you want to have. Just going through it, if you go off a reference stance, they have it set up -2 centimeters. So basically that's going to give you an extra 3 centimeters in nose compared to the tail if you go off of the reference stance. So if you want to ride this more as a twin board, you just move your bindings up 1 insert pack, and that's going to put you in the middle of your radius, in the middle of the board, but it'll still give you a directional twin in that once you take away those 2 centimeters, you end up having a 1 centimeter longer nose than tail. I went through, measured it all. So it makes it actually pretty fun to like kind of play with. You can mess around with it. I rode this board for a couple days just because it's a little bit small for me, but out of those couple days, I rode it on some kind of weirdly like firm, but then warmish days. So it wasn't quite slushy, wasn't quite like icy, kind of right in the middle. So it kind of gives you a good amount of riding under all conditions a little bit, except for POW. So the one thing I noticed with this board is it loves to carve. I had it going off a reference stance, which riding in the park wasn't really too bad. It's one of the first times that I've ridden a directional board in the park, so it's kind of interesting to play around riding switch a little bit, and then hitting park and rails and boxes. I think they only had boxes the day that I rode. Either way, yeah, this board really likes to carve. I left the edges as is. It really wanted to carve, which made setting up for getting onto boxes and rails a little bit different than what I'm used to, where you kind of end up sliding a turn, like setup turns are a little bit more slidey. This was a little bit more of a carving setup turn, which if you like to go fast in the park, perfect for that, because if you carve into your setups, you're gonna carry a lot more speed than you would if you kind of speed check your way in. The board is pretty stiff, so riding in the park, getting on rails, press is a little bit more difficult. Butters on flat, you really have to make sure you're leaning over. It also has a normal camber to it. I saw some review that they said that the camber was more than their normal boards, which compared to a few of the ones I have up here, pretty average, if not less than other camber boards. With that stiffness, if you know how to load up your tail and pop, it really does like to pop. So ollies on this thing, simple. As long as I loaded up that tail, that thing was amazing. So with that stiffness also in landings, if you get it right, it feels so good because as soon as you land, you're taking off towards wherever the next feature is. So the one thing with the stiffness is it kind of follows the camber profile with the board. So the board is traditional camber, like kind of through most of the contact points. So I'd absolutely agree with Weston's ranking of a Flex 7. It is a pretty stiff board. The Flex kind of follows the camber profile of the board though. So through the camber section, which is kind of like, I want to say about here, just before the contact points, it's pretty stiff. As soon as you get out in the nose and tail, it's a little bit softer. So when you are playing with butters, when you do get out on that end, it is a little bit softer and a little bit more bouncy on that, like the nose and tail on the very ends, but you still retain a whole bunch of pop through the middle of the board. It makes it for a really interesting ride. It's something that if I had a little bit longer time on this board and I was going to ride this as my like daily driver, I'd really love to learn how to play around with where the camber is and where that kind of soft playfulness is to figure out how to really ride the board in different situations where maybe you need a little bit of like playfulness and then where you maybe need a little bit more stiffness. Another cool thing with this board that I did notice, and I'm not sure this is something that Weston does with all of their boards or if it was something that the previous owner had, is there is some base structure in this board. So if that's something that Weston does in all of their boards, that means that this is just something extra in your base that kind of gets like almost like these like straight line channels that's supposed to help direct the melting snow through your board and out the back. It helps with those days whenever it's supposed to be like kind of slushy and you get that kind of sticking feeling. Those channels and structures are supposed to help get the water out, almost like your tire tread on your car. All right, so who do I think this board's for? I would honestly say the more intermediate to advanced rider who likes to ride in the park. I would say that this board lends itself more to jumps than it does to rails, with just how stiff it is and the amount of pop that it gives you, and kind of the lack of stiffness in terms of presses. Also, in terms of that all mountain riding, I would say it's more towards the rider who knows what they like in terms of their stance and kind of powability and doesn't want to switch between boards, because being able to ride park with this in a twin stance would be sick, and then being able to do the next day, move your stance back a couple notches for a deep powder day would be amazing. So the ability that this board has to do that, I think it kind of fills that like almost quiver killer style board for someone that this board will actually fit. So in that kind of like intermediate advance, this also applies to, I think, the bigger rider. So someone who's a little bit heavier on this board will actually be able to work out. So someone who's a little bit heavier will be able to flex it easier than someone who's lighter. Probably try to make sure you're on the upper end of the weight scale of this board if you want to ride it a little bit more playful. If you want a little bit more of a charging board, kind of scale it down to where you're on the bottom side of the weight scale. All right, guys, so that's been my review of the Weston Range. If you guys have any questions, comments, leave them down below. If you guys like the video and the review, leave a thumbs up. If you want to see more, subscribe. Have a good one, guys. Peace.